Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I am a customer engineer focused on management technologies. Today's discussion is part 5 of a series focused on endpoint protection in Configuration Manager, which of course is part of Endpoint Manager. Today's discussion will focus on Defender and Advanced Threat Protection Policies. So here's our agenda, and before we get started with our agenda, just to set some context, why are we talking about this? Well, one obvious reason would be for awareness, so that you are familiar with a capability that is built into Configuration Manager. There's potential cost savings for using something that you might already own, and you do own likely Configuration Manager. You may already own the level of licensing needed to access this capability through Azure E5 licensed customers. You own this already. There could be an opportunity to extend the value of Endpoint Manager across your enterprise, Config Manager, Endpoint Manager. And so typically the kind of capabilities we're talking about in this case are handled by security teams inside an organization using role-based access controls, which are available in Configuration Manager, in Intune, which we'll talk about Intune later in another installment focused on Intune of this series. We can craft the console experience so that the security folks that might want to have access to managing through Configuration Manager or Intune can only see and work with those things in that security realm and not get overwhelmed perhaps by some of the other capabilities that are there as well. And also, to set some context before we jump into this, the focus of this session and the sessions in this series is not about the technology that we are looking to manage. In other words, in this session, it's really not a discussion of Defender ATP itself, right? Certainly, there's some basic discussion of ATP that we will have and some things about ATP that you will see. But the discussion is focused on how you would use Configuration Manager to manage ATP settings and so on in your environment, right? So that said, here's our agenda. We'll talk about in the mindset of context setting what Defender ATP is. Then we're going to jump into what the Defender ATP policies are, starting to turn the page toward Configuration Manager. We'll talk about why we care, and we'll get into the fun stuff, the requirements, configuring, actually see it in place on a device, and so on, right? So what is Defender ATP? Well, essentially, Defender ATP is a collection of services and assessments and so on that you can leverage. It is cloud-based, so it runs in Azure. Now, all of these capabilities you see on the screen, I'm not going to read them to you. You can go and reap the benefit of by using Defender ATP, right? Defender ATP, again, is something that you may or may not already have access to. If you have E5, you're licensed for it already, right? So it just makes a good amount of sense to go through and understand this so you can determine where and if it applies to your environment. So these are the capabilities of ATP. So what are Defender ATP policies? Well, effectively, policies are ATP configurations that are basically input down or placed upon the device. Now, this one's a little bit interesting, right? When we talk about configuring things through Configuration Manager and deploying it to a device, usually we're taking a configuration like an application or a setting or something of that nature and applying it to the device, and Config Manager is responsible for it, and so on. In the endpoint protection mindset, anti-malware policies or firewall policies, we're actually placing a configuration on the device. That's not exactly the same thing with ATP. So I mentioned before, ATP is cloud-based. So the configurations and the instructions and so on that you will see with ATP will come from the cloud. The job of Configuration Manager in this context will be to onboard your devices into that cloud service. And that will then allow the device to communicate with the cloud, receive the settings that are applied from there, communicate back and forth, and so on, right? And you'll see that more as we go along. So also, Defender AT policies, really this is about enterprise management. If you have lots and lots and lots of devices to manage, there needs to be a way to do so in a unified approach. And certainly Configuration Manager allows for that across the board, and including with Endpoint Protection and Defender ATP policies. Just like with any other discussion of Configuration Manager, yeah, you could go do all of this manually if you wanted to, but when you have to scale across thousands of devices, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to do that manually and individually. It makes a lot more sense to do it collectively, thus enterprise management. So why do we care about these policies? Well, again, it's an integrated approach in that whole management mindset. It is cloud. And so because it is cloud, then we have the rapid innovation and updating that's possible using a cloud service. We have the rapid kind of interactions for threat analysis and so on that is part of ATP that will come from the cloud. So I listed install with a question mark. And the reason I did that is because typically you think of having to install something or do something on the device, and there's really nothing to install. Yes, there is the process, as I mentioned, of onboarding the device into the cloud service, but really nothing specifically to install. And again, you'll see that more as we go along. E5, already mentioned, if you have E5 licenses, you've already got this in your arsenal of tools that you can leverage. And then why do we ultimately care about Defender ATP policies? They allow us to onboard the device, and then through ATP, we can detect, investigate, respond to challenges that we might find. So investigation and response to advanced attacks that may be out there, right? Okay, requirements. You do need a subscription to Defender Advanced Threat Protection online service. So that is access through a specific URL. You'll see me use that in a minute, securitycenter.windows.com. So sidebar discussion. Usually as Microsoft folks, we have access to most of our services to do any kind of demos and such that we want. This ATP Security Center is not one that was easily accessed in terms of setting up demos. I finally got a solution to be able to do it, but it took me some time, and that's okay, right? As a customer, you won't have any problem at all getting there, but for me, it was a little bit of hoops to jump through to get to it, but we have it. You need Configuration Manager in this context, which is required to manage and deploy the onboarding policies and so on to Config Manager clients. Doesn't just have to be Config Manager for our context, yes, but again, you could do this with Intune. You need a supported operating system for this, so we go all the way from Windows 8.1 to server operating systems, right? So this is not just a Windows 10 thing at all. One thing that we will see in a second, depending on the OS and the version that you're using, there's what's called, some of these OSs are called up-level OSs, some of them are called down-level OSs. So for example, Windows 10 1607 or better is an up-level OS. So there's a different way that you would go about onboarding that particular operating system. Windows 8.1 or previous versions of Windows 10 would be called down-level OSs, and there's another way you would go about onboarding those devices. We have the same kind of split in the server arena, so Server 2012 R2 and certain versions of 2016 would be considered down-level, and then certain versions of 2016 plus 2019 would be considered up-level. Don't worry about that greatly. I'll show you the small differences in how you would go about configuring onboarding of those OSs. It's not hard, pretty easy to manage all of them, part of them, whatever you would like, as we get into the configuration, which is where we are now. So let me pull in a portal here. So this is the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. And I'll just show you this. It probably won't apply to you, but for me, again, being a Microsoft employee, my email address is an @microsoft.com email address. There's reasons internally that I can't do some of these demo things with my Microsoft.com email address. So I need to make sure who I'm signed on as, right? And so here I can see a little bit of detail about the products that, the products that I own and so forth that are here, right? And so I can tell this is the right one. But I don't know why. Here, let me try to refresh this. Usually in the top right corner, there's an account that you can hover over and see what account you're signed in with. I know this is the right one. They're MA, right? So if I click on that, I'm signed in with this account, right? I wanted to verify that because it's tripped me up a few times. I always, when I access some of the tenants, I need to go in private so that I can supply the credentials. And the first few times I was playing with this and came along, my credentials from previous in private sessions were logging. I was still logged in to my Intune tenant, for example, with my other credentials and so on. Yeah, that won't work, right? I need to be logged in specifically with the account and the password that has rights to this particular capability. And so I'm good. So the whole reason I came to the M365 Admin Center in this context is so I can validate that. Again, you can see all the things that you have licenses for and when they expire and et cetera, et cetera. But the real portal that I want to go to, and I will go to it now, is, let's see, security. I can't talk and type at the same time. SecurityCenter.Microsoft or .Windows.com. And so I'm opening another tab, so I should just go there with the same credentials that I've used to log into the M365 admin portal. So we just close out of that just in case. So we're loading that up. Okay, so we should have that up in just a moment, and we will be ready to go. Okay, and the Security Center is now opened up. Now, this is where we have a little bit of an interesting discussion, right? I shared at the beginning that the focus of this session is how we leverage Configuration Manager as a tool to enable the advanced threat protection capabilities of endpoint protection, right? So there's an entire piece of this that we will not discuss in detail, and that is all of the capabilities that you have at your fingertips right here in the Security Center through Advanced Threat Protection, connecting with the Advanced Threat Protection Service and so on, right? This is the cloud piece that we ultimately want to enroll our devices in. So let's just acknowledge that. We're not going to get into the details of this. It is absolutely meritorious to spend time learning this. I will walk you through just letting you see some of this in the console. So on this front page, now this is my lab, so it's going to be very boring, but we see that we have good dashboards here, active alerts, automated investigations that are going on, devices at risk, users at risk, different things, devices with high sensors, blah, 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 on we go, right? Active devices. So this is from me testing this previously. Over here, we have our menu. So we have our dashboards that we can look at. So security operations dashboard that we can get to. Threat analytics dashboard. We were just on the security operation. We can get to the threat analytics and see different detail. Again, my lab, very, very boring. Right? Incidents that might be out there. I don't have any, at least I don't think I do, because I haven't done anything with it, right? Device inventory detail that is reported up. This is my test device as a result of enrolling, in this service. Alerts queue, things of that nature. So there's a lot of other things down below this. So one thing about this particular screen, unless you have just a massive monitor with ultra high resolution, I don't think you're going to see all of the options to the left-hand side. I'm on a laptop, and so my screens are kind of small, and so I have the resolution set to less than 1920 by whatever it is. And so on the left-hand side, to navigate this, I just use my up and down arrow keys. Let me click back on this. Maybe I need to go to the top. I can't remember. Hang on. Yeah. So I can use my up and down arrow keys to some degree to navigate this. In fact, let me see if I can make this a little bit smaller, and then that probably will help a little bit. But you can see other options here. So under reports, you have your threat protection reports, your device health reports, all this different stuff, right? And under the APIs and so on, you can see all that detail, threat and vulnerability management. So again, I'm not talking about this in here. So within this context, I'm going to go down to service health now. Now that I'm on service health, I can scroll this. You see that? So I was within the context of a particular one. Let me go back to here. Now, since I'm on configuration management, on some of these, I can just start at the top and scroll up and down. Here's my menu bar that I can always pop out and start back at the top. Now that I'm at the top, I can scroll it. It's just, it's interesting. So maybe it's just me, I don't know. But I want to ultimately get to settings. Let me see if I can find settings at the bottom here. Configuration management, here's settings. Right? So the goal of what we're trying to do is onboard our devices into endpoint protection. So when I go to settings, I see a lot of other kinds of things that I can do. So email alerts and Power BI reports and rules and all sorts of things. The thing that I care about for this context is onboarding devices into threat protection, right? Advanced threat protection. And this is where we need to do some precursor work before we head over to Configuration Manager to load this all up, right? So, and this is where we decide what devices we want to actually get ready for and enroll into advanced threat protection. So I mentioned there's up-level devices, down-level devices. Windows 10 is an up-level device. So if I click on Windows 10 and simply scroll down a little bit, it's going to give me the option, because of the fact it's Windows 10, of local script that I can use to do that onboarding. Now, don't be thrown by the fact that it says for up to 10 devices. You can do however many devices you need to do. This is my test tenant, and so it is limited, but should be no problem. You can definitely do more than 10 devices. So this is my option. Now, this is going to be, this is one way. Now, there are several ways that you could onboard this device. There's group policy, there's configuration manager, older versions, there's mobile device management through Intune, VDI. What I care about is configuration manager, current branch, and later, right? So I misspoke. This is accurate. 10 devices with local script, because you're then maybe testing it out kind of deal. Here, I'm going to be delivering that control with configuration manager, so that's what I'm going to choose. And it's going to give me a detection package that I can download. So I'm just going to go ahead and download that content now. I clicked on it. You see it's running through that process and resolving what it needs to go download that content. And so we're in the process of doing that now. It'll be here in just a moment. So it looks like I hit on it twice to get this down. That's fine. It's a zip file, so I'll just go ahead and close that one, delete that file, whatever. And so we'll show in the folder, so we can, well, it looks like it's removed, so I can't do that one. Let's show in the folder here. And so this is the file that I just downloaded. These are the same. So I'll get rid of that one because it doesn't matter. And we will move this one over to my desktop so I can then use it again in just, okay, so I moved that to my desktop. Now, we'll use that in a minute. But then once we get everything hooked up, there is a detection test that you can run. And it's just a simple PowerShell script. So I'm going to copy that to my clipboard. I'm going to put that in Notepad. So we can see it's just a PowerShell command line. Where did Notepad go? It's just a command line for a PowerShell script. And so if I pull Notepad back into the view here, we'll see what all it is. Come on, there we go. And format word wrap, there we go. So this is the whole verification kind of opportunity here. Okay, so I have that Notepad. And that's it for onboarding of up-level OSs, that's all the prerequisite configuration we need. Now, there's also the possibility of onboarding down-level devices, so Windows 8.1, Windows 7, server OSs, right, and so on. So I'll just click on Windows 7, Windows 8.1, and you notice that the device monitoring options change. And now we have to install the Microsoft Monitoring Agent if we want to leverage the configuration there, and then use a particular configuration to get that Microsoft Monitoring Agent connected. We need the workspace ID and the workspace key. So I'm just going to copy that out. I'm going to store it onto Notepad, and then we'll be able to reuse that in a minute. So I'll just put that over here. All right, now I need to go get the key. So here's the key. Copy that to the clipboard. And there we go. So we have both of those, and we are ready to go. We're really finished with this portal. Once we move over to Configuration Manager and supply this detail, then the Configuration Manager client will be able to interact with the needed components, so Microsoft Monitoring Agent, or by running the script or whatever, and get that device hooked up with ATP in the cloud, and we can start working with ATP from there, right? Okay, so I'm just gonna, we should be done with this, but I'm just gonna go ahead and minimize it. And we're gonna shift over to Configuration Manager and do the process there. So here's my Configuration Manager site server. So to get things connected, I'm going to start in the Assets and Compliance workspace, which is where we default to when the console opens. And I'm going to Endpoint Protection. And under Endpoint Protection, come on, under Endpoint Protection, we have Defender ATP Policies. So you'll see that I have one there already. But we're going to start fresh as if I did not. And I'm just going to create an Endpoint Defender ATP policy. Fine, accept the terms, give it a name. And you're doing one of two things. You're doing one of two things. You're either onboarding a device into ATP, or you're offboarding a device from ATP. Offboarding's not a big deal, a little bit different, but we're just going to focus on onboarding. And so I'm going to click next here. And next, we will have the need to supply a configuration file. Now, this is that configuration file that I just pulled out of the service. So I am going to grab that. I'm going to pause the video. I'm going to go grab that and move it into my onto my VM. So I will do that and be right back. Okay, so that has been copied. Let me minimize Config Manager's main console. Here is that zip file. So we see it's Windows Defender ATP onboarding package.zip. If I double click on that, then we will have a command file. And I've actually got one on the desktop already, but I'm going to take this one. Let me go and get rid of it. I'm going to replace it with this one, same file, but just to show the process. And there we go. Right, so that file is now on my desktop. This is what we're going to bring into Configuration Manager, and in just a second. So I don't need the zip anymore. I'm going to get rid of it. But I do want to show you this file. This will contain some specific tenant information for your environment. You'll want to keep this secure. This is really just a batch file looking kind of thing. And so you can scroll up and down and see what will happen, some registry keys and different things that are there. And again, this has got some sensitive information in it, so be sure and make this secure. But I have that expanded, so I'm going to go ahead and browse for it and then import it into Configuration Manager. So there we go, easy as that. Now, if all I have is up-level OS devices, then this is all I need to do, nothing else, right? But if I have some down-level OS devices, then I also will need the two pieces of information I had earlier, the workspace ID and the workspace key. So let me go grab those from my Notepad doc. So I'm going to first get the first value here and minimize, and then grab this one, paste. Then I'm going to grab this one and copy it. Okay, and paste that in there. And I'm done with the with the configuration. Click next. Right, I decide a little bit, specify which files samples are shared for analysis by Defender ATP. I can say none, all file types. Those are my two options. Telemetry reporting frequency, normal or expedited, whichever you want. I'll just keep those where they are because this is just my lab and I don't care that much. And that's all. So I can hit next. And now this policy is created. I'm good to go. Now let me pop back up the Configuration Manager console. And so I have, this is the one I had out there, demo policy. You'll see that one in a minute. I've actually got this deployed. Yes. And so the deployment was real easy. All you do is right click and select deploy, and then you choose which collection. So the idea here is you would have a collection of devices that you would like to onboard into Advanced Threat Protection Service. And so then you would target this configuration at those devices, and those devices would get enrolled. Right now, you don't have to target the devices separately. The up level and down level OSs can be in the same collection. We've got the configurations for both, and so it should be fine. Whichever one is needed will be used. But that's it. You will target your collection and off you go. So I've done that already for demo policy, so I'm not going to do it again. In fact, I'm going to delete this one because I've already got one deployed out, right? Okay, and so really that's it in terms of configuring things for Advanced Threat Protection and being able to be enrolled. You actually saw that this device, my demo device, is out there, and because it's already showing up in Advanced Threat Protection Service. It's boring, but it's out there, right? All right. Now, I mentioned that there's another part of this. We've got it configured. There is a way to validate, in fact, the configuration that we just did. There is that PowerShell command. And so let's go run that. Let me show you what that looks like, how you can tell. So if I go to the command prompt, and I'm just going to run this, right? I'm going to paste in, it's on my clipboard already. This is the sample or the example given that we should run to validate the devices onboarded. So I'm going to run this, and then the command window closes. Well, that was exciting, Steve. Thank you for showing me that. How do I know that this device has been successfully onboarded? Because if we then go to the Advanced Threat Protection portal and look at our alerts queue, we will see that there is a test alert. A suspicious PowerShell command line was just executed within the last 30 days, right? So I know that, in fact, that did cause what I expected, that alert would not actually show up unless the device was onboarded successfully. So I am confirming that device is onboarded successfully just by looking for that alert and seeing that alert there. Now, the last part that I want to talk about real quick is the idea of offboarding. So you saw what I did to onboard the device. I also mentioned there is this option for offboarding, and the way that works is you would basically choose Windows 10 here. That's really the only option you need. And then for the offboarding of a device, you can again choose Configuration Manager, Endpoint Protection, or Endpoint Configuration Manager, and then there's another zip file that you would download. So that zip file that you're going to download, I'm not going to go through that configuration again. You saw in Config Manager where you would select an offboarding policy, and then you could use this package, if you would, for the offboarding policy, and that would cause the devices to offboard from Advanced Threat Protection. So the scenario might be that you have a certain number of devices that you want to offboard. So you would create an offboarding policy and deploy that to a unique collection containing those devices you want to offboard. You would want to make sure they are not in the collection for onboarding anymore, right? And then you would just deploy that policy to that collection, and you should be good at that stage. So I'm going to go ahead and close that now. And that really is configuring Config Manager to go through and onboard into ATP. Now, another place you can look if you want to monitor things and make sure of what's going on and so on. If we go to the monitoring node and scroll down to security here, security, open that. Then we can see Windows Defender or Microsoft Defender ATP status. And so this will give us a little bit of a dashboard. So I've got one device in my environment. And so you can see kind of the results just for having one device. I did it for testing, but still I have some dashboards showing up that are interesting and so on. So you can kind of understand for your environment, what it looks like. I have one device healthy and the rest are not onboarded. So that's accurate, for my environment. All right, so we are good to go there. Now, in terms of in-action, I've already shown you kind of the in-action part where I configure the Defender ATP policy. It's pushed out, it's on the device, it works. The other part, the last part I want to show you, anytime I do a session like this or approach a piece of new component or whatever, I always ask the question, how does this actually work? So we saw that I went through the configuration, I deployed it, everything else. How does that arrive on the client and configure the client for onboarding into advanced threat protection? And the answer is, it kind of makes sense. This whole configuration is under assets and compliance. And the whole compliance settings node is under assets and compliance. Endpoint protection is not under compliance settings, but it's right there with it. And so I went and looked, and in fact, we do have under configurations this thing, demo policy. And so that was the name of the ATP policy that I pointed you to a moment ago and showed you was deployed in the configuration manager console. It arrives as this particular compliance setting, and you interact with it just like a compliance setting. You can see it is compliant, meaning that my device has done what it's supposed to do and is enrolled or onboarded to the ATP service. I can go through and look at the report if I want to. If something went wrong, perhaps the report might yield something. It shows me that I'm compliant. There's not a whole lot here and not a ton to dig into at this level. Certainly, if there's a reason to troubleshoot this is going through the normal compliance settings channel. And so the normal logs that go along with compliance settings and so on are useful here. But I wanted to show you where this lined up, right? And there's even ways we can dig in more. If for some reason we need to see the exact detail of how this is configured, well, we've already done it in the UI on the config manager server. But if we need to see a little bit more in detail about what's going on, we can ultimately get to the XML configuration that's behind all this if we need to in the database, but that's beyond where I want to be right now. So I'll just click cancel on this. Right, and so that's really it in terms of setting this up. It's really not that hard, pretty straightforward, incredibly powerful once you do get it set up. So I would urge everyone who's watching this video to take a look and see how this all works. And so starting to edge toward troubleshooting tips and tricks. So I already mentioned that if you need to troubleshoot this, it really is along the compliance settings pathway and related logs. Absolutely take a look at those. A few questions that might come up have come up. One question really that came up on a few discussions whenever I had this, and that is, can these devices that are onboarding into the ATP service leverage a proxy for all that traffic between the device and advanced threat protection in the cloud? And the answer is absolutely yes. There is a little bit more of a configuration that you need to do to make sure those devices are going through a proxy, but that's very well documented. If you just simply go out and look for Microsoft Defender, onboard configuring kind of things, you'll find it. If you look at configure proxy and internet for ATP, you'll find it, and you can step through that if that applies to you. So that's where we will wrap up the session. I appreciate you hanging out, and we will see you next time.